the late. You can find out more by visiting the Wordsworth Grasmere website, where all the activities are going on at Town End and Dove Cottage are listed. So we're fortunate indeed to have this unique opportunity to explore the museum in Jeff Cowton's expert company. And there will, as I said, be some time for questions afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jeff now and ask him to launch our seminar with a tour of the new museum at Wordsworth Grasmere. Over to you, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Paige. It's an honour to begin the conference. I thought it best to begin with a view of Grasmere rather than myself. That's a much better view. It's been lovely seeing the names come up, people saying hello. What a great shame we can't all be together in Grasmere, but as you say, Nick, all being well, next time round. And it's a real highlight of our annual calendar. Is to have the conference and to welcome people to the Jerwood Centre. So this is the second best thing, but you know, with the wonders of technology, it's still better than being here, than not being here at all. So a view that many of you will know, Silver Howe. It's a view that many of you perhaps haven't had from this particular place, because as you might have guessed, I'm actually standing on top of the museum. So there's the roof of the museum. Right, and looking towards Easdale in the distance. If we just sort of pan round a bit too, this is new, obviously, standing on top of the museum, and we did this for two reasons. We've created this sort of viewing station. One is because the view is just great, and it meant so much to the Wordsworths. But secondly, that the terrace in Dove Cottage Garden isn't, of course, accessible to everybody, and we did want everyone to have the view, if you like, as best nearest we could get to it. And so we built this viewing station on top of the museum so that people by an elevator can get here and everybody hopefully can enjoy it. And it does afford us an opportunity too to see Dove Cottage again, like probably never before. So if we move along here and we look down over the top, there is Dove Cottage, obviously from the back. And it sort of, when I look at it from this view, it makes me think that in the Wordsworth time, this wing that we can see nearest to us would have been perhaps just one story and not two. So it makes us realize that how big a part of the building is that we see now that the Wordsworths didn't know. So there's the cottage, and of course the little lane that was then the main road through the Lake District. And what we've tried to do with our new site, which we call Wordsworth Grasmere, is we've tried to make everything on this side of the road. So from a visitor perspective, it's kind of more joined up, if you like. So just there, just where those two people who happen to be my wife and my son walking by, just over the top there, you can see the cafe, the roof of the cafe, then the museum, and you buy your tickets in the museum and you wander down this kind of zigzag slope. I mean, here's an invitation to Wordsworthians. Can we think of a Wordsworthian name that we could give to this zigzag slope? There must be one. I think the word zigzag is once in the Wordsworth Concordance, but if you can think of an appropriate name for the slope, that would be really good. But visitors go down the slope, they watch a film that introduces the characters and the story, and then they go into the cottage. The cottage is, as it might have been as a house, it's much more like a house than it used to be. And then into the garden, which is beyond this tree, the Portuguese laurel. And there you can maybe just see the steps in Dove Cottage Garden. So that's the visitors. That's the historic side of the visit, if you like. Step back in history. Be as close as we can, we hope, to that sense of 200 years ago. But then when you leave the garden, which is just down there, you step very much into the 21st century. And that's when you enter the museum. So I'm hoping that we don't lose contact. We may move from 4G to Wi-Fi. Probably not a conversation that Wordsworth would have had, I imagine. But then we come down to here and we enter the museum on the first floor. And we enter the balcony. Those of you who knew the old museum, what we're looking at here is where the cottage scene used to be. So this is where the cottage scene used to be. And Instead now, we've removed part of the floor, and you can see there a wall with words. And it's intended as the first thing that you see when you come in downstairs. And you're greeted with 5 lines or more than lines of Wordsworth, and they light up in rotation. And it's part of this sense of slowing down. We invite visitors to kind of stand and to look, and then the walk down to the cottage, then the film. Our hope is that it's becoming a step out of the modern world, a step out of the busy world that is too much with us, if you like, and that we step back and we become more receptive to the story, to the place, and to the words. So these are the words that you see when you first come in, and they're also the words that you see as you leave. And they're also the words, by the way, that you will see in your coffee cup when you go to the cafe just afterwards. So from the balcony, turn round, and then entering the main museum. It's got a rather wonderful grand reveal when we press the button, and we enter it rather ceremoniously into the gallery. And really, a visitor can choose the route that they wish to take, but we hope that they'll read this first panel. And the first panel invites a question. We'll actually invite a statement, and then for the visitor to decide for themselves. Wordsworth is a poet for our times. Here in this place, just over 200 years ago, William Wordsworth wrote groundbreaking poetry that he hoped would live and do good. Were his hopes fulfilled? Does his poetry live and do good? And so we've drawn out 3 kind of themes, if you like. Wordsworth calls for us to reconnect with nature. He asks that we show empathy for others, and he encourages us to nurture our creative imagination. Now, they may be sort of quite general principles, but we feel they're very appropriate to this gallery. So we invite visitors to kind of think about those themes and to think about, does the poetry live and do good? Now, in the center of the gallery, and this is thinking back to Wordsworth's guide and when he's at Lucerne, and when he looks at the model of the Alps, and how that intrigues him and tempts him to walk between the valleys, we've created in the middle of the gallery our own 3D model. It's not perfect. I'll be the first to say it's not perfect, and a version of it is being repainted and redrawn. But the idea is that the visitor gets a sense of place right from the start. So orientate yourself, and it's in the gallery, so that the things that you read in here, you want to perhaps check the locations, as it were. You can come back to this each time and kind of ground yourself. So one person's telling me that there's trouble hearing. Is that everybody? Is there a problem?
I can hear you well. I can hear you well, Jeff.
Shall I just carry on? Is this okay?
Yes, carry on.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. So we're going to move straight into what we call Gallery 4. Now, the colouring in the galleries is very kind of loosely based on the local stone. So if you know the lakes, you'll know it's kind of a bluey grey. So one room has got a blue theme to it. And then in Easdale, to the west of Grasmere main valley, is a kind of red as stone. Easdale, I think it's sort of more of an ironstone. So we've used the red theme for this room. And this room with the red theme, if you like, is very much based on life at Grasmere. And it starts, some of you will know this letter very well, of the first letter William and Dorothy wrote to Coleridge on their arrival that Christmas 1799. And it's just kind of amazing, both in its appearance and in its content, the trials and tribulations of setting up a home. But it kind of brings to me, what I love about this letter is William talking about Dorothy's sense of what the place offers as potential, and particularly the garden. I mean, Dorothy has got toothache, I think it is. I think she's got a cold. She's doing the house preparations. William's writing a letter. So there you go. But that's the first letter written from Dove Cottage. And the poem, of course, that we know that relates to Wordsworth as a boy, talking about here should be my valley, this valley be my world. There's the manuscript, the earliest version for that. And then Dorothy writing about Grasmere in a poem. And we're going to next year, this year actually, do an exhibition celebrating Dorothy's 250th birthday. part of that, we'll look at Dorothy and her poetry. And here's a really lovely example of the poems of making Grasmere their home. My youthful wishes all fulfilled, wishes matured by thoughtful choice. I stood an inmate of this vale. How could I but rejoice? So that's going to be a wonderful exhibition. So Home at Grasmere, this exhibition, this display rather, well, you can see walking stick, post bag. As we often say, if there's one thing most people know about Dorothy, is that she walked to Ambleside every day to collect the post. Well, we know that's not strictly true, but it is something that people know. And the socks, I remember when we were thinking about what to put in the new museum, I was in the gallery upstairs and I was watching visitors, and this man came by and he said, you know, he said, I've just seen the most amazing thing. I can't believe what I have just seen. And I thought he was going to say, you know, the manuscript of the prelude of Dorothy's journal. He said, I've just seen Wordsworth's socks. Now, up to that point, I think the socks weren't going to make it to the new museum, but, you know, here they are. And so it's these things that mean a lot to people, to see the Wordsworths as real folks living real lives, writing remarkable words. And then just what I ought to say is that there are many voices in this museum. There's a face that some of you will recognize, and in a moment there'll be another face that you might recognize. And this is in the museum we have something like 13 or 14 audio-visual points where different perspectives can be told, different stories can be told. So here's Polly taking her perspective on Dorothy, and of course Pamela Wolf also hers. And together, it's a fantastic little bit of film, is this. But the audio points as well are also very moving. So here is the Leech Gatherer, Dorothy Wordsworth's journal describing the meeting of the Leech Gatherer, and next to it, Sarah's Poets with an early version of that poem. And there's a piece to go with it, an audio piece by Lucy Newlin, where she talks about the poem, but she also talks about, with reference to her own book, but on bipolar. And so the ups and downs of the life of a poet are covered by Lucy in the audio piece. So again, trying to think of different perspectives on these poems from real lived experience. Life in Grasmere, of course, the wedding, the love letters, the children, but then of course to follow, sadly, tragically, in 1812, is the death of the two children, Thomas and Catherine, and the letter that Dorothy wrote to William and to Mary to tell them that terrible news that Catherine had died when they were away from home. And Surprised by Joy, the poem, linked to that, of course, but again, an audio piece, this time below from the Reverend Cameron Butland, who himself sadly lost a child, and he talks very movingly about how the Wordsworth experience and the poem relate to his own experience. In the next film, I'm not going to do every case, don't worry if you're worried about the lack of time. Somebody else you might recognize, Sally Bushell, talking about the poem Michael, but then that's followed by this lady, two women who are themselves hill farmers today, talking about how the poem Michael speaks to them and their attachment to the land, like Wordsworth and Michael talk of attachment to the land. So it's about making the poems relevant to people's experiences. The Guide to the Lakes, well, we could talk ages about Guide to the Lakes. If any of you know Grasmere at the moment, you'll know that it really is overwhelmed by the numbers of people. And so the sonnet to the Windermere Railway is in the book of English ground secure from rash assault. Those words often come to mind as the traffic and the parking kind of take over Grasmere. So technically we're kind of at the end of the exhibition. I joined it partway through, and the final words in the exhibition go to a group of young poets. So we are kind of mentoring young poets living locally, and we invited them to respond to Wordsworth poetry. And so their words, their poems, specially commissioned for this exhibition, are the last thing that visitors hear when they see the exhibition. I'm now going to pop out of here again. So you see, as you leave, you come back to the word wall. So we're going to scoot round and we're going to re-enter the museum. And one of the things about, of course, a museum is giving people context. Maps give context, but so too do chronologies. And so we give in Gallery 1 a timeline of Wordsworth's life. It's relatively short compared to the previous museum, but it links the events in Wordsworth's life to the events that were national. Clearly the French Revolution, but Waterloo, and the many events like that. And people do, we watch people, and they do look up and down between the national events, as you can see here. So there's the Declaration of Independence compared to the birth of family members. And so visitors do come back here like they can with the map and kind of ground them. Now, for some reason, there's a film not working here, but this is Simon Bainbridge. And it's a moment to recognize that there's a lot of people involved in this museum, making it as it is. Simon played a really key part, as did Stephen Gill, and many others. So it's just a moment where I can thank people there again for their great help and great enjoyment in putting this together. This is one of my favorite things. This is the letter to the Bishop of Llandaff. And you might just be able to read there, if you know this work, the revolutionary pamphlet that Wordsworth wrote, 1793, never published, but signed, what does he say, by a Republican. Well, the power of that very word, and that's what Simon brings out in the film. And then the cartoon, of course, depicting the horrors of the events in France at the time. But then as we go along, simple things like a teacup that belonged to them at Alfoxden. First editions, all the major first editions you can see. It's not what everybody wants to see, but I'm sure everybody at the Wordsworth conference would enjoy seeing the first editions of lyrical ballads, right through the poems, right through the Dutton sonnets, through to the prelude. And then De Quincey's writing. De Quincey, who turns up in 1807, having a few years earlier written this great letter of admiration to Wordsworth, saying that, token of his admiration and love, and that he's ready to sacrifice even his life in Wordsworth's service. And if you're able to join us in, I think it's late September, I think we're doing the event, which marks the 200th anniversary of the Confessions. Greville Lindop, David Rudderman, looking at the manuscript and looking at the value of Confessions today. So that's one of our webinars that's coming up. And then Coleridge, the falling out with Coleridge, and the letter of 1812, and Coleridge writing to Wordsworth, I declare before God Almighty that at no time, even or more, sorest affliction did even the possibility occur to me of ever doubting your word. I never ceased for a moment to have faith in you, to love and revere you. So there's wonderful Coleridge, and we're hoping to have an exhibition on Coleridge late next year to mark his 250th. A lot of visitors like this. They love the life mask, and they love Hayden's comment about Wordsworth sitting with his hands folded. Hello? All right. Sitting with his hands folded, sedate, steady, and solemn, unable to see or to speak. And as you may know, getting a life mask made involved keeping still and having straws up your nose so that you could breathe. And then the suitcase, familiar from Dove Cottage, the old interpretation. And again, I love this. This is the candle shade. Wordsworth suffering, as you'll know, from eye troubles, and the candle shade to protect his eyes. So if we now move to this is the last room that we'll look at, hoping we've just got a little bit of time. In Gallery 2 here, we have the poems read, and you can sit for an hour, and you can maybe hear Ian McKellen's voice. And you can sit for 50 minutes and listen to different voices from Ian McKellen, Simon Armitage, through to some of the Dove Cottage poets. And you can hear the poems beautifully read with this wonderful backdrop. And then the final room, talking about Wordsworth as a revolutionary poet, a radical poet. So one of these themes being the lyrical ballads, of course, and this manuscript too, from that period, from the old Cumberland beggar, talking about we have all of us one human heart. Well, If you love those lines, here's the manuscript on which they first appeared on paper. So this is the Christabel notebook. And then the response to the lyrical ballads from John Wilson, and the great letter that Wordsworth responded, questioning John Wilson's criticism of the Idiot Boy, and really, in itself, of course, that manifesto for his beliefs for poetry and who it should be for and what it's about. And illustrating the lives of ordinary people in the northeast of England is Thomas Bewick. And we have a great collection of Thomas Bewick manuscripts, but also these wood blocks, these amazing wood blocks. I don't know if they're showing up on the camera, maybe not, but these amazing wood blocks that created these beautiful pictures. And if you like, telling the lives of ordinary people in the northeast as Wordsworth lived in the northwest. And we're hoping very soon to be able to allow people to create their own prints. So we have this printing press, and we're going to set up a block rather, and visitors can make their own. We've got a little block that they're going to use, and it's an extract from the chapbook of We Are Seven in 1820. So that would be wonderful to see the press in action. And then just to end, well, what a way to end. We tell the story of the writing of the prelude that we have here. I think it's 23 of the 24 manuscripts of the prelude, the earliest 1798, the last 1839, and here they are in chronological order. So from the earliest starts within the ruined cottage through to the manuscript, Was It For This? Manuscript JJ of the prelude. That amazing letter written to Coleridge, which we know as the Goslar letter, full of the prelude, but also Lucy poems. We show the outside of manuscripts because too often you don't get a sense of them as 3D objects. So there we have a couple of notebooks used around about 1800. 1799 version of the prelude. There we are. That's in Dorothy's hand. And then really, I would suggest the greatest moment in the museum. This is the 1804, 1806 moment. The Malta notebook taken by Coleridge in 1804 after weeks of work by William, Mary and Dorothy, and somehow surviving the journey to Malta there and back in the company of Coleridge. And Coleridge in 1804, about to go to Malta on account of his health. The portrait by George Dance done in London just before he set sail. So there's Coleridge. One of the notebooks, again, one of the notebooks that they think of as the Calais notebooks, brought back when William and Dorothy were in Calais visiting Annette, in which they thought it was some of their smarter stationery. And then the 1805 prelude. I mean, what can you say? There is the 1805 prelude, written by Dorothy, revised obviously very heavily by William in the years and decades that followed. The only known young likeness of Dorothy, the silhouette discovered, I think was it about 1970, I think that was discovered. And then the portrait of Wordsworth, the only portrait of him from the Dove Cottage years. So here he is, 36 by Edridge. So in this one showcase, portraits of Coleridge and Dorothy and Wordsworth and the 1805 prelude, it was the poem to Coleridge, and that the great collaboration that was involved. And then we take it from 1805 through to the excursion and the first sort of public announcements of the prelude. I love this case too, because here's William and Mary working together in the 1830s, together with the prelude that Mary created and which again Wordsworth revised, but the tools of the job, you know, there's the penknife of Mary, and also the spectacles and I think it's copper sulfate, this stone that Wordsworth rubbed in his eyes on account of the illness in them. And then at the very end, of course, the 1850 prelude, in this case, a copy dedicated to Isabella Fenwick, the great family friend in later years. And just to show that the story doesn't stop there, here we have the first parallel text of the prelude, 1926, with the 1805 on the left, 1850 on the right, and the annotations by Helen Derbyshire. So revision still going on, revising Ernest de Salincourt's 1926 edition for her own edition to come out next. So the work carries on. And then the final thing, just to show you, the poet Nick Mccoy. And so Nick Mccoy was our poet in residence a couple of years ago, and telling us how coming into contact with Wordsworth poetry in Grasmere had such an impact on his life and his writing. So I think at that point, Nick and Paige, I'm going to stop. I've no idea where we are with the time, but I'm going to put that down there and hope that somebody's still with me. Are you still with me?
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was a wonderful introduction to the new museum, to the viewing platform at roof level, but also showing us so clearly the wonders that are on display in the new museum, the new interpretation of familiar and unfamiliar items, and also what's incredibly impressive on the on your camera, from your camera, is the clarity with which the exhibitions are now organized. And I know from my own experience seeing this, that the history of the Prelude is a wonderful story being told with exemplary clarity. It really works exceptionally well. Now, for everybody, we've got as much time as Jeff can kindly spare for you to ask any questions you may have. So if Paige could monitor where the hands are coming from, we can open the seminar to questions for Jeff. So thanks again, Jeff, and over to anyone who has questions.
I ought to say, of course, you can come and use a quill as well. There's lots of things, lots of things to do. There's lots of things for families. We have live poetry readings on site as well, with people in costume reading it, I have to say, really, really well. But this is by far the most popular, to pick up a quill and some iron gall ink and have a go at writing. So there's things to do.
Incredible. Let's see if we have some raised hands. There are so many of us I have to scroll through to see. But if you have questions for Jeff, raise your hand under the reactions button, and we'll give you a chance to ask it. Well, I don't see any questions, but we've got a lot of commentary, and I will add to it. I'm so excited for the opportunity to come over, hopefully sometime soon, to see the new museum in person. I can say that Nick and I were admiring the wall of words. So Nick, do you want to go ahead? Have you got a raised hand, Nick?
Yes, I have. I think it would be interesting if you could just give us an outline of how long it took to bring about this extensive refurbishment of the whole of the town end site, because I know it's, you know, it's not a matter of 6 months or a year, and I think people might be interested to hear.
Sure. I've no idea how I'm framed in this picture. Is it okay? does it kind of work?
Yes, yes, fine.
All right, thank you. Many of the people watching will know the Jerwood Centre and will know that it opened in 2005. And I think we always thought after that that we had to redo the museum. The old museum, which was new when I first came to Grasmere, which is 40 years ago now, that really it wasn't up to modern interpretation. It wasn't up to modern design. And the visitor numbers in the 2000s were declining. So something had to be done. And I think we started thinking about sort of the master plan probably about 2010 or 12. And Michael McGregor, the director, and I were very fortunate to be able to tour a number of museums in Europe and America. And we tried to see, how did people display manuscripts? Because they are clearly our greatest asset. And for people at the summer conference, poetry is a first love. For many people, poetry is a last love. Poetry, manuscripts, and a poet who died, let's say 200 years ago, is quite a hard sell. And we wanted to kind of really to address those issues. Otherwise, I mean, we could have turned it into a social history museum. Some literary museums really don't mention the literature too much. We wanted to put poetry up front. And so poetry up front, the relevance of Wordsworth, and how can manuscripts tell a story beyond, if you like, the subject matter within them. So those were our, if you like, our three challenges. And so we went to these museums, and I think we sort of felt that we didn't see many answers on our journey. And so we put together a bid for the museum. We went to the lottery fund, and we were rejected first time. And we put it together again, and we were rejected the second time. And then on the third occasion, which was about 2016, we were fortunate. We were successful. Each time we resubmitted, we felt that the plan was a better one. So we think we benefited from the rejections, if you like. But it did mean that every failure, as it were, and every year or two it took to resubmit, that we were getting closer to 2020. So had we got it in 2017, 13 rather, we would have had plenty of time to get the new museum ready for Wordsworth 250th. By the time we got to 2016, we were getting, really anxious about it. But our hope always was to open this. This was going to be our celebration for Wordsworth 250. But of course, we know what happened. We couldn't do it, and we've only just been open really for the last few weeks. And so we've got a lot of catching up to do. Some of you, I think, will be part of our social media day on the 7th of April 2020, and that was a great event. I mean, it reached more people than opening the new museum reached, but it does mean that we are a year behind. So it was a long process, a long consultative process, and just thinking about the big word wall that we started. I mean, in a sense, that's very typical of doing a museum, because you're trying to match the things that you feel people should know, and if they but knew, it would really mean something to them. But at the same time, you also need to respond to what people would like to see there. And it can be very surprised, because one of the lines that means such a lot is, in this moment, there is life and food for future years. And to most of us, I think, it means that in this present moment, who knows the good it will come, that we can draw upon these moments. Well, when I showed that to a lot of people, they thought it literally meant food, that, that you would eat. And so that rather kind of spoils something in there, brings it down to earth a bit. And so we had to think, well, do we go with our feeling that this is a wonderful line that we want people to enjoy, or do we say, most people are going to misunderstand this? Well, we put it in, as you probably know. And so that sort of thing all the way around, like with the socks, like with the manuscript, like with the stories, it's what we think, people ought to know, as it were, in I suppose sort of slightly arrogant way, but at the same time, taking into account what will speak to people, and taking into account how they might respond to it. That's the key thing. If people don't respond to it, there's no point. We're just wasting the life of a manuscript by exposing it to life. Sorry, Nick, that was a terribly long answer.
That's terrific. Thanks very much, Jeff. It's very interesting.
Shall we go ahead and have a question from Lisa Vargo? Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, this question may be a bit off base. It's a bit of a disorganized day here with the beginning of classes and troubleshooting things as an acting head of department. But thank you for the tour, Jeff. And it's really interesting to see how the museum has been restored. I'm quite interested in the garden at Dove Cottage. Yeah. And so my question may be a little bit off base, but I'm wondering, as you gave the tour, does the museum have information about the garden? I know the garden was restored a few years ago. I just wondered, where could I find more information about Dove Cottage Garden? So thank you.
If you send me an email, I'll be very happy to put you in touch with our gardener. And we've been very fortunate with gardeners, and at the moment I would suggest we're as fortunate as we've ever been. We have a gardener who is a botanist, a qualified botanist and a qualified garden historian, and she has identified the plants within the garden. She's identified those that Wordsworth could have known, from the writing, but also from the time they've been introduced into the country. And she is gradually replacing plants that they couldn't have known, if you like, with ones that they probably did, and which we have written evidence that they introduced. It's transformed, I have to tell you, because a lot of the sort of larger bushes, shrubs have been taken out, and younger versions or new plants have been put in. And it really does have that sense of the Wordsworth semi-wild garden that they talk about, the plants and the deeds that they bring back from the valley. Now we know, don't we, that the garden had kind of three elements. So there was an orchard that De Quincey talked about as a wood, I think, or Sarah Hutchinson talked about as a wood. There was an area where they grew vegetables, and then there was the area where they had flowers. And what we can't really be sure is where any of these were. We know that the orchard was near the top of the garden, near where the moss hut was built. But as to where the vegetables, where the flowers were, we just can't be certain. So all we can really say is, I suppose, is that reimagining work, or sort of that word again. We're using the source we've got in intuition to try to make it something that bears a resemblance to what they write about and what they might know. But I'll be very happy to put you in touch with our head gardener, and she just loves talking and writing about it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And always a pleasure to see Wordsworth socks. So
So I'm going to learn, yeah. Yeah.
Have we got any other questions?
If
I've
you,
got
if
one
you
here.
haven't, there's something else I could just add without extending the evening. Yeah. And that is the whole question. And I know Simon will sort of smile to himself when I say this, but the whole question of writing interpretive text, because we limit ourselves to 50 words or 340 characters for a label that goes with an object, and we limit ourselves to about 100 words for the panels that introduce the sections of the museum. And I was listening to Simon Armitage Goes to a Shed the other day, and one of his guests, they were talking about writing sonnets, and they were talking about writing haiku, and they were saying it really focuses the mind to have such a limited structure, and it was as much about what to leave out as to what to put in, but actually focusing on the very story, as it were, or the very thing you want to say. And I was listening to that, and I was just thinking, well, that's just what it's like writing exhibition labels. That it's what you leave out, and you focus just on that very thing that you want to say. And part of the new, it's just interesting in the writing for the new museum, so the new Dorothy exhibition rather, and there's someone contributing who themselves is a poet, a writer of sonnets, and they've done beautifully the 100 words and the 50 words. I guess maybe it's that discipline of writing to the point in an economic way as you can.
Absolutely, very difficult to do. It is like poetry, indeed. We have a question from Connor James, and there's also a question in the chat from Mako Halloran. So let's go ahead and have Connor ask your question if you'd like, and then we'll take some of these questions in the chat as well.
Thank you very much. I'll keep my camera off, if you don't mind, just to keep things as smooth as possible. The museum looks wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff, for the tour there. I really hope to visit as soon as possible. Thanks to all involved for this seminar as well. I'm interested very much in the impact of Dorothy and Mary on William's life and works, and so I was pleased to see their manuscripts adjacent to one another. So is it an aim of the new museum to showcase the roles of Dorothy, Mary, Sarah and others played in William's poetry?
I think, Connor, if you were to spend time here, you would see that in a number of ways. So if you were to spend time with where I am now in the Prelude Gallery, you would see that their names are referenced right through, because we tell the story of the Prelude through dates, but also through extracts from letters. So there's very little, if you like, by myself or others to say this happened, then this happened, then this happened. The way we've done it is through the extract from letters, particularly of Dorothy. And so you can see that she is so much involved in the creation of that poem. And in the museum as well, 3 of her surviving notebooks for the Grasmere journals are on display, and 2 of them relate to the writing of poems in particular. We looked at the Leech Gatherer, and we've also got, of course, the Daffodils, the 1802 Ullswater Gobara Park moment. And so visitors can kind of see that relationship between the 2. But we also, of course, want Dorothy to speak not just in relation to William, and that's where that film by Pamela and by Polly comes in, because that's purely about Dorothy as an individual in her own right.
Wonderful.
I mean, Mary, sorry, Conrad. I mean, the one thing that just comes to mind when we were doing this, we calculated that Mary copied out 20,000 lines of poetry towards the prelude just on its own. You know,
wow.
You know, it's kind of remarkable to think.
Yes.
All done with it, you know, all done with
Wow.
the quill,
Incredible.
and all in beautiful handwriting. Yeah, so they're very much represented. And Conrad, if I must just say too, that the way the cottage has changed as well is that it used to very much be about William and Dorothy, because of course the journal is a major source of information, and so it was very much William and Dorothy. And what we've tried to do now is to think about the other 5 years that they lived there. You know, when it becomes a family home. So it's a family home in the park. So Mary is much more represented there than she used to be.
Wonderful, Jeff. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. And you.
Mhm. We do have a question in the chat that I think would be worth bringing up. Mccoy is curious to know if you have a sense or if you have information about how visitors have responded to the new museum.
That's probably the most important question of all. We can do this anecdotally, and it would be exaggeration to say that never a day goes by when I don't get comments from the front of house staff telling me how a visitor has expressed real enjoyment and real. I mean, some of the best comments we had was early on when a visitor was overheard to say, "I think I'm going to have to rethink Wordsworth." Well, that's what we could hope for, rethink Wordsworth. Or we'll get where a parent comes round, the reluctant, you know, there's often a reluctant parent who comes round with the rest of the family, and he's kind of obviously made a bargain that he'll come here today if we go somewhere else tomorrow. And to have one, like there was a scientist, a father who was a scientist came around, and he didn't expect to enjoy it at all, he told us. He thought he was going to be bored, rigid. And he really loved it, and he was really pleased to see a reference to Sir Humphrey Davy. You know, just seeing a reference like that gave him a kind of relevance to it. So we're finding that people are spending longer. They're surprised to spend longer. But in terms of systematic evaluation, we found that the cottage interpretation people like. We're doing formal evaluation about watching visitors go around the gallery. And one of the things that we've noted there is that people do exactly what I did tonight. I focused on the timeline, and then I forgot to turn around and show the daffodils. I think I did anyway. And visitors often don't turn around, so they miss, if you like, that key poem, the one that most people know if they know any of Wordsworth. So I think the answer to the question is, so far, oh yeah, TripAdvisor. Oh blimey, TripAdvisor. One of the first comments was they'd enjoyed their visit, but why on earth did we have to have unisex toilets? You know, that was their big complaint. So we got 4 stars because we had unisex toilets. So I think that aside, we will be doing more evaluation, but we're very pleased that people are spending longer and the comments we're getting are favourable.
I think just the fact that they're spending longer speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yeah,
That's excellent.
And there's so much family to do. I'd just like to, at this moment, to give another word of thanks to Sally Bushell, because she and colleagues at Manchester have created a Minecraft version for the Spots of Time. And I don't for a minute begin to pretend to understand this, but young people sit there transfixed for ages, just going through Wordsworth adventures from the prelude. And I think we've got 13 iPads donated to us by this project, and that's going to become a major part of our school's activity, is taking Minecraft and iPads out to school. So it's all, you know, this is the very beginning, isn't it, really? It's the beginning. It's not the end of a project because we've opened. It's the beginning of great things to come, we hope.
That's wonderful. I think we have just one more quick question, which is around access to manuscripts for visiting scholars. Is there a different policy? How does that work?
Right. So you're very, very welcome. Drop us an email, make an appointment, come and look at the manuscripts. If you don't know the Jerwood reading room, it's a fantastic place to work. You're surrounded by 2,500 volumes, none of them younger than 1850, and the first editions and early editions of Wordsworth and Keats and Shelley and Byron and many, many more. So please come and look. If you're not sure what to see, just write to us anyway, and we can say what we've got. The one thing that's not as good as the previous museum, and I don't wish this to be misunderstood, but these cases are far more secure, as you would expect, than the previous museum. So it just takes us a little longer to get the manuscripts out from display for people to see in the reading room. So that's kind of a good thing, but it does mean that we would ask for a bit of advance notice before you came, so that we can arrange to get them out the day before, and then you're not just sort of waiting. So I would say get in touch, but as much notice as possible, please, and then we can be ready for your visit. But everybody's very, very welcome.
Wonderful. One more question actually about manuscripts. Are there digitized versions of the manuscripts and letters available for anyone to view?
So some people will know of the Adam Matthews digital resource, which obviously is a thing to pay for, and a lot of universities use that. A lot of students I know use it. If you wish to see digital images of a particular manuscript and it's not super long, we could provide those. We'll just send them as a WeTransfer, you know, within reason. If we can save someone a visit, hundreds of miles visit just to look at a page or two, obviously we'll just send the JPEGs to anybody who inquires. But obviously I'm not committing to sending all the JPEGs for the Prelude or Dorothy's Journal, but we'll do what we can to help. Absolutely. Are you still there?
Yes, yes. So I think this is so incredible, and I cannot wait to get out there to see it all. I think that is it for questions. So Nick, we'll leave it over to you. Yes.
Thanks very much, Paige. And Jeff, thank you again very warmly from us all for a really interesting walk around the new museum, showing us some of the highlights. And I know, as some of our participants today also know, having visited the museum, how much more there is to see. And you showed us the completely transformed grounds around the museum and Dove Cottage earlier. And there's so much more, of course, to explore in Dove Cottage as well, which has also been transformed brilliantly in ways that make us see it and experience it all anew. It's been a real treat. We're all very grateful, and we're looking forward to visiting either this year and certainly, let's hope, next year at the Winter School or at the summer conference. So thank you again from us all. It remains for me to say we start tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning UK time with Simon Bainbridge's lecture on the rhythms of mountaineering, and then we move into the first of our panels on tomorrow's programme. So I think that more or less wraps up our brilliant start to the summer seminar, and we all look forward